Hello, this is Dr. Brown, and this video we're going to get into the first part of our data analysis unit. We're going to be looking at the basics of statistics and learning some terminology that we're going to be using in our study. This is going to be basically the information from page 227 to 239 in your textbook. First definition is that the population of a study is a group. The collected data is intended to describe is everyone in the group. Some examples for a population would be, for instance, over 8 million people living in New York City, everybody that's there, all the elephants in Africa, all migrating eagles in Alaska, all EGSC students, and all EGSC online students. And of course, you folks are a member of both of these populations, 4 and 5. Now, a parameter related to a population is a value that's calculated using all the data from the population. So you're going to include everyone. You're not doing sampling. Now, population parameters are not used all that often because it could be very expensive to survey an entire population, take a lot of time, cost a lot of money, unless the population is small or we already have the data. Another definition, a census. A census is a survey of an entire population, and I'm sure that you have heard of the U.S. Census that's coming in the year 2020. Another definition, a sample is a smaller subset of the entire population, ideally one that is representative of the whole population. And this is where you really need to be very careful in figuring out your sampling technique. You take the population and then you do a selection of individual observations. Hopefully that will give you insight or inference about the population. Over here, visually, you see a target population and then a sample taken from it. Now, statistic is a value that's calculated using data from the sample. So if you did the entire population and calculated the average of the ages, that would be a parameter because it's the entire population. But if you take it from a sample, it's called the statistics. Example, a newspaper or website has a poll asking people their opinion on a recent news article. What is the population? It's basically the readers of the newspaper's website. Another example, a college reports that the average age of its students is 28 years old. Is this a statistic or a parameter? Well, it seems to be inferring that they're talking about the entire college, and that would be a parameter. Now let's talk about data types. The first is categorical or qualitative data. This is information that allows us to classify objects under investigation into various categories. Doesn't necessarily say anything that's numerical or quantitative, whereas quantitative data are responses that are numerical in nature and with which you can perform meaningful arithmetic calculations. Let's try to classify each measurement as categorical or quantitative. Zip codes, even though these are numbers, they don't tell you how large anything is or how much it weighs or how old something is. They're just zip codes, and they're categorical. The eye color of a group of people tells you a lot about various folks, but nothing quantitative, so this would be categorical. Whereas if you looked at the daily temperatures in a city over several weeks and studied that, that would definitely be quantitative. And then if you looked at the annual income of a population, of a sample, this would be quantitative. Now, a real key thing in statistics is being able to choose a sampling method that is not biased. So a sampling method is biased if every member of the population doesn't have equal likelihood of being in the sample. Now, this picture is from a 1948 newspaper in which Harry Truman, shown here, it had been predicted by a newspaper poll that Dewey would defeat Truman. And of course, Harry Truman's picking up the newspaper after he won by a good margin, and very happy that he did. And why did the newspaper poll mess up? It's because it was a biased poll. A lot of voters had no phones, and this poll was done strictly by telephone. So they didn't talk to a lot of people that may have been in rural areas that had no phones at the time. So you need to be real careful in choosing your sampling method. Sampling methods, random sample is one in which each member of the population has an equal probability of being chosen. And a simple random sample is one in which every member of the population in any group of members has an equal probability of being chosen. Very often you might use a computer that can generate random numbers or random data to help you choose out of the population the sample. Sampling methods. Stratified sampling is when you divide the population into a number of subgroups or strata. Then samples are taken from each subgroup with sample size proportional to the size of the subgroup in the population. So here's one in which we divided into two subgroups, women and men, and then did random samples of the women and random samples of the men. Okay, sampling methods. Quota sampling is a variation on stratified sampling, and where you collect samples in each subgroup until the desired number of samples is met or desired quota is met in each subgroup. Sampling methods continued. There's a method called cluster sampling, in which you take the population and divide it into clusters or subgroups, and a set of the subgroups are selected to be in the sample. Here's an example of maybe a large city and which has, say, 32 precincts, voting precincts, and you select precincts 5, 16, and 28, and interview all the voters in the shaded precinct. Systematic sampling, you take every nth member, could be every fifth, every third, or every 20th member of a population to be in the sample. Convenient sampling maybe is sometimes used, but it might not be all that scientific. It's when you just basically select whoever or whatever sample might be convenient. And so here's an example of a lady spotting somebody walking a dog and saying, hey, do you believe in the death penalty? That is convenient sampling. Voluntary response sampling is allowing the sample to volunteer. You probably heard of customer or client satisfaction surveys, and in which customers are given an opportunity to respond to a survey and give their opinion, and the customer may or may not complete the survey. Of course, very often a customer might want to go to a website to give his feedback, and that's still voluntary. Let's identify which type of sampling is used here. See if you can figure it out before I click on it. A sample was selected to contain 25 men and 35 women. That would be stratified sampling. Suppose viewers of a new show are asked to vote on the show's website. That's pretty clear that that would be voluntary response sampling. Every fourth person in the class was selected. That would be systematic sampling. Then a website randomly sends a satisfaction survey to 50 of its users. This would be a simple random sample because it just picked 50, and we're assuming here it was done, it does say it was done randomly, so it's a simple random sample. To survey voters in a town, a polling company randomly selects 10 city blocks, interviews everyone who lives on these blocks. That's like picking the precincts. That would be what we call cluster sampling. Now, observational studies and experiments. An observational study is done in which nothing is actually done with those in the study. In other words, you're not doing any experiments on them. You're not giving them anything to taste or to take. You're not really interacting with them. You're just observing. Now, an experiment is a study in which the effects of a treatment are measured, or the effects of certain maybe scientific technique could be studied. This is where many new medical cures come. All kinds of breakthroughs have come, scientific breakthroughs and other great insights can result if you're doing an experiment. Well, that is the video on the basics of statistics.